Hey everyone. You know how sometimes you stumble upon a story in the news and you're just like, hold on, this is kind of a big deal.
Hmm.
Well, that's how I felt reading about this whole BRICS group expanding. It's been all over the headlines. And for good reason. It could mean some pretty major changes on the world stage.
Right.
We're talking about a whole group of nations. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Plus, they've got new members joining, like Saudi Arabia, the UAE.
Yeah, it's interesting how it's evolving.
It's interesting, right? And it's not just about economics either. It's like they're trying to completely reshape the world order, you know?
Absolutely.
Intriguing. Intriguing is an understatement. So we're going to dive deep into all of it.
Hmm.
What BRICS Plus even means, why it matters. Is this actually the start of a whole new era? Or is it just hype?
I'm excited to dig into this.
Me too, because honestly, when I first heard BRICS, I was like, is that like a new cereal or something? But for
Yeah.
real, this is way more than just breakfast.
It is. It is. You're absolutely right to be paying attention to this. This isn't just like a social club or something. It's a statement, you know?
Right.
These nations, many of them with these booming economies, they feel like the current systems, the global systems, which were largely, let's be honest, shaped by the West, they don't benefit them enough.
Yeah.
Imagine you're sitting at a table, right?
Yeah.
And the rules of the game are always kind of tilted in favor of someone else. That's kind of what they're trying to change, you know what I mean?
Totally. And this Carnegie article I was reading about it, they just came right out and said it. BRICS Plus is about challenging the West's dominance.
Hmm.
And they even mentioned the G7, you know, those powerful Western nations, kind of getting a little nervous about it all.
Well, of course. Yeah, it makes sense that they would be a little bit. I mean, it's a historical shift that's happening, right?
Right.
For decades, the G7 has basically held all the cards. They set the agenda on, like, everything. Trade, finance, international security, you name it. But the world is changing, and these BRICS plus nations are stepping up saying, hey, we have a voice too. We should have a seat at the table.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, there's also this whole thing about the global south and the global majority being thrown around.
Yeah.
Can you break that down? Like, who are these groups, and is BRICS Plus actually representing them?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's really more nuanced than just like drawing a line on a map between the North and South, you know?
Right, right.
These terms, they acknowledge that a lot of nations, often in the Southern Hemisphere, share this history of, well, colonialism, and they feel underrepresented in global affairs.
Mm-hmm.
But huge caveat here, gotta
Yeah.
remember there's so much diversity within these groups.
Oh, absolutely. So it's not like BRICS Plus is this like unified voice speaking for everyone.
Exactly. It's not as simple as that.
Okay, so maybe not speaking for everyone, but they're definitely making moves.
Hmm.
The article mentioned them creating their own versions of, well, everything. Banks, financial systems, even undersea cables. Are they literally trying to build a whole separate world?
I wouldn't say separate is the right word, at least not yet.
Okay.
Think of it more like strategic autonomy. They want to depend less on Western-controlled systems, you see. They want to grab the reins a bit more when it comes to their economic and technological futures.
So it's more about having more control.
Exactly. Take the New Development Bank, for instance.
So what now?
The New Development Bank, it's a great example of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Basically, the BRICS nations, they established this bank as a different option to the World Bank. They see the World Bank as, well, let's just say, too influenced by the West.
Interesting.
It's about options, right? Having more leverage, shaping a world that reflects their interests better. I mean, that's a pretty bold move, wouldn't you say?
Bold is an understatement. But the article also said BRICS Plus isn't exactly like one big happy family.
Right. Right. I mean, you've got China, a global superpower, seemingly calling a lot of the shots. Then you've got India and China, who seem to be rivals as much as they are partners. Can they even agree on what they want?
That's the question, isn't it? The million-dollar question.
Right.
You hit on a really, really important point here. BRICS Plus, it's not like this perfectly aligned block, you know?
Right.
It's a group.
Yeah.
They've got some overlapping interests, sure, but there's also some, well, pretty significant friction going on under the surface.
Yeah.
China, I mean, they obviously have a lot of sway. They've
Yeah.
got the economic power.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that everyone's just going to fall in line, you know?
Right. Right.
And then you got India and China. I mean, talk about a complicated relationship.
Yes.
Rivals, partners. It's both. And that dynamic definitely adds a whole other layer to how BRICS Plus operates.
Yeah.
Can they work past those internal tensions? I don't know. Can they present a united front when they need to? We'll see. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And speaking of these power shifts and, potential tensions, there was this one line in the article that really stuck with me. An expert, they were quoted saying, "We're living in a time of monsters."
Hmm.
Now, I don't know, that sounds kind of ominous, right?
Yeah. It's a very evocative phrase, isn't it?
Right.
And I think it speaks to, well, the uncertainty of this moment we're in. We're watching the old world order, the one where the West has dominated for like ever. It's starting to crumble. But what comes next? That's the big question. I think that's where the monsters come in.
So it's not necessarily about like specific countries being monsters, but more about the unpredictable nature of this power shift.
Exactly, yeah. Think of it like tectonic plates. When those plates shift, you get earthquakes. And those earthquakes, yeah, they can reshape the landscape, but they can also cause massive damage. This reshaping of the global order, it could lead to something better, right? A more multipolar world, more balanced, a more equitable distribution of power, ideally. But there's also this risk, the risk of, well, miscalculation, conflict, unintended consequences. I think those are the monsters we need to watch out for.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
And that ties back to what we were talking about with the G20 earlier, right?
Yeah.
If BRICS Plus is gaining all this momentum, what does that mean for the G20? Which, includes both BRICS nations and those Western powers. Seems like things could get even more complicated.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even before this whole BRICS Plus expansion, the G20 was already struggling to find consensus.
Yeah.
Climate change, global health, financial stability. These are big, hairy global issues. They affect everyone.
Right.
You've got 19 countries plus the European Union, all with their own agendas, their own priorities, getting everyone on the same page. It's like herding cats, honestly. And that was before. Now
you add BRICS Plus expansion into the mix.
Exactly.
It's like adding more voices to an already chaotic conversation.
And, well, some of those voices. They're getting louder, more assertive, more confident. So, yeah, I mean, it's a big deal. It could really impact how effective the G20 can be going forward.
So where does this leave us then? This Carnegie article, it kind of frames it as if, like, if the G7, those Western powers, had just been nicer, shared the toys a bit more, maybe none of this would be happening.
I don't know if I'd frame it as a matter of being nice exactly.
Okay.
I think it's a lot more complicated than that. But you're right. The system, as it stands, it does tend to reflect the interests of the West, right?
Yeah.
They largely built it, after all. The institutions, the rules, even just the way we think about these global issues, it's all shaped by a particular worldview.
So is this it then? Is this a complete power shift? Game over for the West?
I wouldn't say game over just yet. The West, they've still got a lot of cards to play.
Yeah.
Economically, militarily,
But
Ben.
it's definitely facing a challenge, a serious one, and
Yeah.
it needs to adapt, clinging to the old ways, assuming they still hold all the cards. That's not going to work long term. And that's where that whole time of monsters thing really gets to me. It's like we're moving from a world with one set of rules to, well, we don't even know what the new rules are yet or who's making them.
It is a bit unsettling, isn't it? It's a critical period, transition.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it, well, both exciting and a little scary. Because on one hand, you've got opportunity for dialogue, new ways of cooperating, figuring out these global challenges together.
Right.
But on the other hand, you've got the risk of miscommunication, of countries retreating into their own corners, these different blocks, and then no one's talking anymore. And that's when things can get really, really bad.
So what's the ideal scenario here? Everyone just hold hands and sings Kumbaya. What are we hoping for?
Let's shoot for a little more realism, shall we?
Fair enough. So realistically, what are we aiming for here?
Realistically, okay. I think a best case scenario is one where the G7, BRICS plus as they figure out a way to actually work together, cooperate on those big issues we talked about. Climate change, global health, financial stability. Those are the things that affect us all. Doesn't matter where you live, what block you belong to, but for that to happen, it requires something from everyone. Compromise, willingness to share power, share influence. And that is not easy.
No, it's not. And what's the worst case scenario? We end up on the road to World War III.
Let's hope it doesn't come to that.
Right.
I think a worst case scenario would be a complete breakdown of communication, of cooperation. Tensions escalate, economic warfare, maybe even military conflict. No one wants to see that. But it's a reminder, right? The stakes are incredibly high with this global power shift.
Okay, so maybe we need to lighten the mood a little bit, but it's important to be realistic, right?
Sure.
So knowing all this, what can, everyday people like our listeners, actually do about it? I mean, it's not like we're out there negotiating treaties or anything.
Well, you're right. Most of us aren't shaping foreign policy from our living rooms.
Yeah.
But we can still play a role. And it starts with, well, awareness, understanding these forces that are shaping our world, engaging in these conversations, but like informed conversations, and even just demanding that our leaders, the people we elect, that they pursue policies that promote cooperation, promote stability. That all matters.
So less doom scrolling about World War III and more informed action.
Exactly. Doom scrolling never solved anything. Let's
Yeah.
take that energy, that anxiety, and put it towards something productive. Learning, engaging, advocating. We can build a more peaceful world, a more equitable world.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it,
What's that?
That something like BRICS plus, this group of nations, most of them, halfway across the world, it could actually impact our lives here. Like, how does that even work?
Yeah, that's the thing about globalization, right? We're way more interconnected than we often realize. Remember, we were talking about all those systems, how they're all connected,
Right.
the global economy, trade deals,
Yeah.
even climate change. Those things, they don't care about borders.
Right.
So those decisions that are being made in those BRICS plus meetings, they could have ripple effects. And not just little ripples either. I mean, they could affect everything. The prices we pay for things, the stability of our jobs. It's a butterfly effect, but on a global scale.
Okay, yeah. Starting to connect the dots a bit here. So before we wrap up, let's do a quick recap for everyone listening.
Sure.
What are the key takeaways here? The things we really want people to remember about BRICS plus BRIC?
Okay, good idea. So first and foremost, BRICS plus B, they are a major player. Now, this isn't just some passing fad on the world stage. This is big. It could be a seismic shift in global power away from the West towards a more, what they call a multipolar world. That's takeaway number one.
Multipolar meaning.
Meaning power isn't all concentrated in the hands of one or two superpowers anymore. Think of it like this. Instead of just one or two big players calling all the shots, now you've got multiple power centers, each with their own influence, their own agendas, their own priorities.
Got it. Okay, what's next?
Number two, BRICS plus Ben. Yeah, they present this united front to the world, but, and this is important, they aren't a monolith, Like we were talking about earlier, there are some serious divisions within the group. Competing interests, especially between those big regional powerhouses.
Right, that whole India-China dynamic. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not going away anytime soon. Okay, so multipolar world. BRICS plus challenging the old guard, but also dealing with their own internal struggles. What else? What's number 3?
And this is a big one. This power shift, this whole thing we're talking about, it's not inherently good or bad, It creates opportunities, yeah, but there are also a lot of risks that come with it. On one hand, you could see a more just world, a more equitable world, one where the voices of the global south are actually heard. But there's also the risk of, increased tension, miscommunication. Things could even escalate into conflict if everyone's not careful.
So kind of a giant question mark at this point. The future, I mean, a lot depends on what choices are made. And not just by these world leaders, but by everyday people, too.
Exactly. That's what makes it so fascinating and so important to be informed. We're at a crossroads, basically. And the path that we choose collectively, it's going to determine what the world looks like for, decades to come.
No pressure, then. Well, on that note of exciting uncertainty, I do have one final thought for everyone listening. Remember that Carnegie article we talked about? All those countries practically lining up to join BRICS plus Val.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Just imagine for a second that you are the leader of, I don't know, a developing nation. Would you join this alliance? And what would you demand in return? Something to think about, folks. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of BRICS plus now. It's a fascinating time to be paying attention to global affairs, that's for sure. And with that, we'll catch you next time for another exploration into the stories shaping our world.